Assalamu alaikum. This video is going to be about summary writing, and because maximum responses yesterday suggested that we go ahead with summary writing, we're starting off with this. We're going to first talk about when your paper is. Now, whether we are talking about GCE or we are looking at IGCSE, please ensure that you have your dates checked out. The paper is on the 6th of May, which is a Wednesday, and the paper is in the morning. So make sure that you reach your centers on time so that excessive stress levels are taken care of even before the exam starts. Now let's move forward to the very first thing which we have, which is time management. Now, whether we are looking at ID or GC, it doesn't matter. Strategic planning is more than half of your grade, is something that I always tell my students. So if we take a look at IGCSE exam papers, we get 2 hours. I am going to be discussing GCE in the next 2-3 minutes, so please be mindful of this. Now, those 2 hours are very rightfully divided into text A, text B, and text C. Because the topic for today is summary writing, we are only going to be looking at text B. Question 1F is the summary writing question that we have for an IGCSE paper. Now let's go towards GCE. When we look at GCE, we are again looking at those 2 hours, but now they are divided into text A and text B. So there is no extra text C that we see in IGCSE paper. When we are looking at a GCE summary writing question, we are also looking at text B, but now that question is actually question 3A. So there is a slight distinction between what the question ends up being in an IGCSE paper and what the question actually ends up being in a GCE paper. Regardless of whether this is 1F or question 3A, I would like to point out that the way that you're going to solve this and the time that you're going to spend on each of them is more or less the same. What do I mean by that? There is a 3-step process that goes into solving a summary writing question. We call it reading, we call it annotation, and then we call it writing. So you can remember this by the acronym RAW, which is reading, annotation, and writing. Now, reading and annotation more or less collectively get about 10 minutes. And when you are talking about writing, we are looking at approximately, you can say, 18 to 20 minutes. So all in all, the time that we are spending on question 1F or 3A is actually approximately, give or take, 30 minutes. Now 30 minutes means 120 minutes minus 30 is equal to 90 minutes. You are going to be left over with 1.5 hours even after your summary writing question has been taken care of. So this is just a general time division that you have to keep in mind. Please don't forget RAW. We'll come to that in a bit. Let's move forward. So where do we end up finding the summary writing question? Like I just suggested, we have question 1F in an IGCSE exam paper and question 3A in a GCE exam paper, and the word limit. The word limit is the most important, the elephant in the room, as we say. We're going to be talking about this as well, but the word limits differ. The word limit for an IGCSE exam paper is 120 words, or as the exam likes to call it, not more than 120 words. And then for GCE, it's 150 words, or like the exam paper calls it, not more than 150. Now, what does it mean by not more than 150? Am I allowed to go above the word limit? Do I lose marks for going above the word limit? How many words can I go above the word limit? These are all questions that we're going to be answering in the video in a while. All right. So now what we're going to be discussing is the word limit. Now, the IGCSE exam paper says no more than 120 words, and GCE says no more than 150 words. There are a couple of things that you have to keep in mind. Number one, the 120th word limit or the 150th word mark does not have to be hit, which means that there are some kids who are under the impression that I have to extend my summary or I have to prolong it and of course become repetitive in the process. So what I'm saying is that there are some kids that end up being repetitive. Why? Because they feel like they have to touch these word limits, but that's not entirely true. If your summary ends up checking all the boxes You have approximately 10 content points. It's very coherent, it's very fluent, it makes sense, it's relevant to the question, it answers everything that's, the question asks for. And suppose you end up at 105 words here or 130, 35 words here. Can you stop? Absolutely yes. You are not compelled, or no one's asking you to stretch your summary forward and, I don't know, end up giving a conclusion of a sort just so you can hit the 120th word mark or the 150th word mark. That is not true, and examiners don't really recommend that to you as well. So the moment your summary checks all the boxes and everything is done and you haven't touched the maximum word mark, you leave it as is. You stop there. So that is one thing that you need to get out of the way, which is that you don't have to touch the excess word limit or the last word limit, as we say. Now, what happens if you go above the word limit? Now, that is something that I will answer at the end of the video because I need to link it to the mark scheme, so we'll get to that in a bit as well. Let's move forward to the marks that we have for the summary writing question. Now, again, GC and IG have, they do have their differences in lots of things. Of course, with the wording changing, the marks are going to change as well. IGCSE has less marks, thereby less word limit as well. And GCE has more marks, so more word limit. It's 20 marks against 150 words and 15 marks against 120 words. And those 15 marks are divided into 10 marks for content, 5 marks for quality. 20 marks are divided into 10 marks for content and 10 for quality. Now, what do we mean by content and what do we mean by quality? Content, just keep in mind as a general discussion, as examiners usually discuss in the School Support Hub on Cambridge website as well, that they are looking at enough points, or the word that we use is sufficient evidence to prove that the child has gone through the text and has answered the keywords. Now, a general understanding states that we are looking at more or less 10 points. And we generally tell our students to not write more than 10 and to not write less than 10. Why do we say 10? Please remember that I'm not saying that 10 marks are going to be given for 10 points. So 1 mark is not equal to 1 point because the summaries are marked holistically, which means that everything is marked together. It is just to ensure that we are giving the examiners enough evidence or data to prove that we have gone through the text and we have looked at the keyword in the question and we have, provided enough answers for them to have an idea that the question has been taken care of in a very nice manner. So that's for content. But as far as quality is concerned, generally speaking, we are looking at SPAG. So SPAG stands for spelling and punctuation and grammar. So spellings, punctuation, and grammar generally incorporate everything that we have. So spellings, spelling errors, wrong, inconsistent spellings may end up costing you marks. Punctuation means, again, a wrong use of a full stop, wrong use of a comma, wrong or correct use of a semicolon, which, by the way, examiners really like, or exclamation marks, which we generally avoid in summaries, question marks, which we avoid in summaries, and quotation marks, which we also avoid in summaries. So these 3 are usually what we are looking at, and these 3 are usually what we are avoiding. So IGCSE or GCE does not matter. A few basic things are going to stay the same. Let's move forward to the next thing that we have. What is the assessment criteria for a summary writing question? Now, this is where things start to get slightly tricky. Differences in IGCSE and GCE start becoming a bit obvious when it comes to the assessment criteria. So what do I mean by assessment criteria? And assessment criteria actually means the way that you are being judged. What is the examiner looking for when they are looking at your questions? So let's take a look at the IGCSE format first, and then we can compare it with GC and see how things change, because there is a change. Maybe some of you can actually identify this right now while you have this in front of you. But for those of you who can't, I will make it obvious. It says that your summaries are supposed to have explicit ideas, Your summaries are supposed to have implicit ideas, something that I always tell my students that I teach in class as well, that we are looking at explicit points and we are looking at implicit points. What do I mean by that? Points that are on the surface level are known as explicit. So the direct points are called explicit. And remember it like this, that I for implicit and I for indirect. So the indirect points that may have been hinted at in the summary, and of course they're there, are also going to be found by you when you write down your summary writing question. And then what are you doing? You are using that information, so selecting, which means identifying. So you are identifying and then using that information for specific purposes, which of course means answering the keyword of the question. Now, up until this point, these are all the reading assessment objectives. And these are the writing assessment objectives. Let's compare the reading assessment objectives with those of GCE. GCE asks you to figure out explicit meanings, which means direct points are going to be figured out, and then we're going to identify them and we're going to write them down. So if you have made it clear to yourself or you have figured that out, excellent. The difference is that in IGCSE exam, examiners are expecting you to focus on implicit, but in GCE, all of the points in your summary are going to be direct. There is no indirect point that you are going to be writing in your summary question. So if you are appearing for a GCE paper, or if you're appearing for an IGCSE exam, make sure that this thing is clear to you, that for a summary writing question, and this is possibly why most of you are ending up losing marks as well, because in the IGCSE summary, most of you are only focusing on the direct points that you have. However, the question demands that you take a look at the implicit ideas as well, and most of you don't even know what those are. So you are going to figure out the direct stuff as well as the indirect stuff if you are appearing for IGCSE. However, for GCE, you are only going to be looking at direct ideas. So this is the first, or let's say one of the many distinctions that we have between GCE and IGCSE. All right, let's move forward to what the questions look like. Now this one right here is question 1F. This is 3A. So this makes this IG and this one's GC. What are a few similarities? You must use continuous writing. You must use continuous writing, not note form. What do we mean by note form? Note form actually means bullets. So you are not supposed to write down your summary in bullets. Same thing as that. What's another similarity that we have? 10 marks for the content. 10 marks for the content. So this is another similarity that we have. Similarity, 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 and similarity. Now we move over to differences. 5 marks for quality, 10 marks for quality. We already discussed it, so I'm not going to discuss it anymore. Summary should not be more than 150 words. Summary should not be more than 120 words. Again, a difference, so we have that as well. One more similarity that I just see, use your own words where appropriate. Use your own words as far as possible. I feel like now is the best time to discuss this as well. What do we mean by as far as possible or where appropriate? These are a few things that need discussion as well. Please remember that one of the key marking criteria for a summary writing question is usage of your own words, because lifting, which is the term that examiners use for copy pasting, lifting the text from the text that they have given you and then simply, copying it out and pasting it down and writing it exactly the way that it has been given will not give you a mark, because why would the examiner give you a mark for something that they have provided to you in the first place? The marks are for you producing a summary in your own words while using TextB as a guideline. So what do they mean when they say as far as possible or where appropriate is that as much as you can, try to use your own words. What I mean by that is that on certain occasions, there are some proper nouns in the text which cannot be changed. For example, if the summary is about Antarctica, Examiners are not expecting you to come up with a synonym of Antarctica. I mean, obviously, you can't change that. Number two, if there are names, for example, which also, by the way, are proper nouns. So if, for example, in the Iron Man context, if there was a name Sam, I think, or in one of the other past papers, which was, I think, about Sunny and his dad on his 50th birthday, the son's name was Sunny, who was using his camera to record his dad while he was cycling. So you are not going to change the word Sunny. So if there are names, for example, somewhere, or if there are proper nouns anywhere, which are still part of the names, you're not going to change them as well. Number three, what happens if you come across a word that is really difficult for you? For example, if we have the word impudent. Now, impudent means rude. But if you, for the life of you, can't figure out what the word impudent means, instead of writing a wrong synonym of the word, I will recommend you that you use this word as it is in the context that it has been used. So what are a few things that I've told you so far? As far as possible means as much as your intellect allows you to do. Now, of course, you have to have a discernment. You need to make a very collective, important judgment on your behalf. What am I changing and what am I not changing? So am I going to change proper nouns? No. Am I going to change names? No. Am I going to change a word which is, whose meaning is not clear to me? No. Then you have common nouns as well. So for example, if the summary is about elephants, you're not going to change the word elephant into a, large, mighty, gray creature with tusk and, all of that. You're not going to say that because that's ridiculous. You're going to use the word elephant and you're going to write the word elephant as is. So again, these are a few things that have to be kept in mind, because the moment you tell the kids, oh, use your own words, they're like, I have to change every single thing that's in front of me. But that is not how it's done in a summary writing question. Certain things have to be changed, certain things stay as they are, and then you bring both of them together and you produce a coherent piece of writing, and that is what we call a high-tier response. Let's move forward. All right, so this is where we start taking a very interesting turn of how you're going to write it down. We've talked about what a summary writing question is, and we've looked at the marks, and we've looked at the differences of IG and GC, but now this one is same for IG and GC. So how do you end up writing it down? There are a few things that you can of course see in front of me and in front of you, but I've just fleshed out the notes, the most important ones in front of you. Let's take a look at them real quick. Selecting relevant ideas from the text. What do I mean by that? I'm going to take you up here for a bit. So suppose I have this question. All right, so suppose I have this question. What are the keywords in this question? According to text B, how and why are old buses being used? There are two things that the question is demanding out of me, which is how and why. How are old buses being used? Why are they being used? A general common sense would indicate that I end up answering both of these questions. But how do I do that? Now, I told you a while ago, if you remember, that we write down 10 points. So what do I mean by these 10 points? Try and write 5 and 5 for this. If you can't figure out 5 and 5 points for each of them, try and write 6 and 4, maybe 7 and 3, but then, we start having a slight inclination towards this one, and these points start becoming less. Just try and ensure that you are providing, again, it all comes down to giving sufficient evidence. Try and ensure that you are giving sufficient evidence for each question that's being asked as a part of the summary writing question. So if the question says how and why, I need to show the examiner that I have spent enough time and I figured out the hows of the question and the whys of the question as well. Because if I end up spending more time on the hows, examiner is going to get an impression that I couldn't find, for whatever reason, I couldn't find enough points for the why. And of course, that is going to decrease my reading, score in the marking scheme, because reading and writing are marked separately. So you need to ensure that you are providing, what are the two words that we're looking at? Sufficient evidence for all the questions that are being asked. Let's take a look, or that are being marked. Summarize what would appeal to guests about a stay at the Tree Hotel. So what would appeal? Appealing, anything that's appealing is anything that's attractive, anything that's going to lure the, guests in. So we're looking at any form of an attraction at the Tree Hotel, and there's just one limb to this question. Now, some questions are of multiple limbs, some questions are bi-branch, some are tri-branch, some are bifurcated. It all depends on the question. A good reading of the question is going to ensure that you answer it nicely and that everything is taken care of. So this question specifically asks you for two things. This one only asks you for one. Now, there's a difference. So you have to read the question carefully to understand exactly what ideas am I going to pick out. And that was the first thing that we were looking at, relevant ideas. Relevant means in this question, I'm going to be looking at hows and whys. But in this question, it's only about the attraction. So again, focusing on the question, focusing on the keywords on the question, clarifies what you are looking at. Next, what do you do next? You organize them in a summary, but the organization part is what most of the kids miss out on. So how do you organize? You organize them by a couple of things. Number one, you reorder the material and you remodel the wording of the text. You're going to organize your summaries by using these two things. The words are reordering and remodeling. Now I'm going to spend 1 or 2 minutes on this, so please pay very close attention. Reordering means that if I have a text and this is my text and the points are in this order, am I allowed to pick a point from here and a point from here and merge them together? Absolutely yes. In fact, examiners recommend that I do this. Now I'm going to say this again. If this is the text that we have and the points are in a specific order, 1 is here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Am I allowed to somehow merge point 4 with point 9 because they are relevant and they go together? Can I do that? Absolutely yes. In fact, examiners recommend something that I just said a couple of seconds ago. They recommend that you merge and reorder the points in the text, which means, am I allowed to change the order of the points in the text? Absolutely yes. In fact, that is a recommendation from the examiners. So what have we learned so far? That there is a certain sequence of the points in the text, and you as a candidate are encouraged to change that structuring of the points, because you will have to end up with something that is a coherent piece of writing. Coherent means easily understandable, fluent, to the point, relevant. And in order to do that, you may have to play with the points a bit. And in fact, that playing with the points is actually encouraged. Next is remodeling. Remodeling means that you're going to be, again, playing with the wording, changing them wherever possible, letting them stay as they are where possible, and then combining your own words in them, and then, coming up with a structured piece of writing. Now, a few things that we have here, which are obviously Captain Obvious. Avoiding repetition. Please do not repeat, for the love of God. And anything that's holy to you, do not repeat anything in summary. There's no mark for repetition. If you have written a point once, even if you write it down 10 more times, you will only be marked for it once. Number 2, examiners are not babies or kids. They can easily tell if you're saying the same thing but in different words. So if you're trying to trick them by saying the same thing but in different words, you are not going to end up with a mark. So a point can only be marked once. Now, as far as this planning and organizing is concerned, we've already discussed the organizing part. The planning is something that I will talk about right now. So what are we doing? How are we solving it? We're going to read the question first, underline the keywords. After we have read the question, we've underlined the keywords. For example, in the IG question that we just read out, it was about how and why are old buses used. And in the GCE one, we had the question of the appealing to guests. So these are the keywords that we have regarding the questions. And then what happens? Once we have read them, then we're going to read text B. Now, if you were listening to me carefully, there were actually 2 words that I used in the beginning: skimming the text and scanning the text. Now, these are 2 key techniques that we utilize for reading any sort of a text. Skim is to have, like, you know how you say a bird's eye view, so like a basic idea of something. But a scanning is, you can say, a meticulous way of reading something. So when you are reading something in a detailed and focused manner, that is actually your scanning. So what you are doing, if I were to simply put this, you're reading the question, underlining the keywords, and then scanning, not skimming, scanning the text for all the relevant ideas. So what are you doing? You're going to read the question first, underline the keywords, which are this, and then you are going to scan text B to underline the relevant ideas. But it doesn't stop there. For most of the kids, for 90% of the kids, it does. But examiners recommend that you don't stop there. What do you do then? This. 90% of the kids miss this part out, which is why they end up losing marks, and they're not even aware that they are losing marks. So what is happening? Once you have scanned the text B and you have underlined all of the relevant ideas, you're going to write them down by numbering them out. There's plenty of space. You can do it on the insert. You can do it on your answer sheet. You can do it anywhere that you want. So what are you going to do? You're going to flesh out your notes, and all the points that I have underlined, I'm going to write them down like this. What is this going to do? This is going to do multiple things. Number one, if I start numbering them out, it is going to ensure, for me as a candidate, it's going to ensure that I have written 10 points. So number one, clarity of the task. I will ensure that I have had enough time with the question, or that I've spent enough time with the question, and then I've written sufficient points for my summary. So it's going to take care of the content part. It's going to ensure that I have enough points. Number two, what you do after you flesh out your notes is that you ignore text B. Once you have read text B, you've underlined your points, you've written them down like this, then you ignore text B. What is that going to do? It is going to ensure that there is no copy paste from text B. Exactly something that we are aiming to do and trying to avoid at the same time. So what is this writing point going to do? It's going to ensure that I'm not copy pasting from text B. So these are two most important things that kids usually miss out on, one or the other, or sometimes both. You're going to read the question, underline the keywords, scan text B for all the relevant points, and once you're done with that, once you're done underlining, you're going to write those points down in a skeletal format. Skeletal means bullet points, phrases, words, anything that will give you some guideline to write on your summary. And once you have these points, you are going to produce your summary from this. You're not going to look at text B again. Like I said, you're not going to look at text B again. You're going to write down your summary from this. Please remember to not look at the text. I'm saying this so many times now that it's starting to get a bit repetitive, but this is for you guys, because what you do is when you start looking at the text, subconsciously you start copying long chunks of phrases, and that ends up being a problem. Now, there's also something that I need to get out of the way before somebody asks me this. Is there any mark for writing the points like this? No, I have to clarify this, that there are absolutely no marks for writing the points like this. So then why are we doing it? We're doing it to ensure that we end up gaining marks where we are being given marks, which is the summary writing question itself, 15 and 20, that we have, IG and GC. But am I getting extra marks for writing down the points like this? No. So we have to be clear when it comes to that. All right. So what are a few advices for summary? 1/20th word mark does not have to be hit. I told you this in the very beginning. 1/50th word mark does not have to be hit as well. Can I stop summary writing if I have reached 110 words, 105 words, 130, 35 words? Absolutely yes. What are a few advices? Number one, reread text B after reading the question. Why? Because it helps you identify potentially relevant ideas. Because once you have the keywords in front of you, then it's very easy. Your eyes and your mind start making a connection. It just becomes really easy after that. Then you plan your response. How do you plan it? This way, like I just taught you. And then use your plan rather than the text to write your response. Why are we doing all this? We're avoiding lifting. We're trying not to copy paste from the text. Group them together. I taught you, I think, a while ago. Yes, here. So merging, or this is also called grouping. So group points together. Why are we grouping, by the way? Because we are looking at, just by the way, we are looking at complex or compound sentences when we talk about summary writing. We are not looking at simple sentences. How do you end up with compound or complex sentences in summary writing? You group relevant ideas together. What do I mean by that? If I have 10 points, then they are not going to be equal to 10 sentences. This is not what we want. What do we want then? We actually want that if I have 10 points, I actually end up having 5 to 6 sentences. How am I going to ensure that this happens? I'm going to group ideas together. I'm going to merge relevant ideas together. So this is how to ensure that you end up writing a very nice summary. Let's talk about what not to do. Oh God, I can't emphasize more on this. I don't know where you guys have been learning all this and where it comes from and all of that. But please understand, guys, that you are not going to include an intro and you're not going to have a conclusion. If somebody has told you this, please, maybe they weren't aware. Of course, nobody tries to teach you anything that is incorrect, but just know this, that nowhere in the examiner report, in the syllabus documents that we have, in the sample responses that we have, you can email examiners, you can email absolutely anyone, and you can ask them. Nowhere has anybody ever mentioned for giving an intro or a conclusion. What do I mean by that? It's a very easy thing that I tell my students, which is that the first sentence of your summary has to be the very first point, and the last sentence of your summary has to be the very last point. That is how you ensure that there is a, so very relevant summary. We avoid writing extra, excessive, redundant, details, so we ignore all of that. No intro, no conclusion. Number 2, do not quote from the text. There are no marks for lifting. I've said this so many times now. No marks for copy pasting. Don't use quotation marks. I said this in the beginning as well. Do not add comments of your own. Please remember that what is a summary? A summary is an abridged version of a longer text. So abridged means anything that is smaller. You know how bridges join ideas, join two places, for example, sorry. So when you have a summary, you, for example, have a 3-page document and you're going to write it down in one paragraph. And that one paragraph is going to be a reflection of those 3 pages. Now, does anybody care what you say? Absolutely yes. In paper 2, not in paper 1. Everybody cares and has all the respect in the world for your ideas, just not in paper 1. So leave those ideas and imaginations, for paper 2. For paper 1, just stick to what the texts are telling you and just do as you are told. No comments, no opinions. And avoid including unnecessary details which are not part of the question. If the question asks me about how and why old buses were used, why will I talk about what old buses are? The question doesn't ask me that. Why will I even bother to spend time on this? I have to strategically manage every single second of my exam time, and this is just going to, just ruin everything for me. So I'm only going to talk about the hows and the whys, or the appealing of the guests, what appeals to the guests about the Treehouse Motel, for example. So only relevant information. Now let's talk about a few questions that kids may have usually at the end. Can I make paragraphs? In very simple words, yes. Is it recommended? I mean, not really. So if you ask me if you lose marks, if you make paragraphs, no. If you end up making paragraphs and that is just the way that you like to write, is that a problem? No. Can you make them? Sure. Do I recommend them? Not really, So why do I not recommend them? Because it just looks really nice. Summaries are like one document, one paragraph, and it just looks nicer that way. But that is just my opinion. If you feel like you want to make paragraphs and that is just the way that you work, by all means, you're not going to lose a mark. Not at the end of the day. What happens if you go above the word limit? Now, this is a question that honestly needs a discussion of its own, an entire video on its own, but I'm going to try to make it short because we're already, the video is becoming too long. What happens if I go above the word limit? Just so we're clear, in both paper 1 and paper 2, IGCSE and GCE and A-level, for example, if we talk about all three, Englishes that I teach generally, you never lose marks for simply going above the word limit. You're not penalized simply for going above the word limit. I was supposed to write down 150 words in a summary. Am I going to lose marks if I write 180 words for going above the word limit? No. But then why do I lose marks? The reason that you lose marks is, I want you to take a look here. So if we take a look at the GCE mark scheme, and then we're going to take a look at the IGCSE mark scheme as well, the writing table, the marks for writing are maximum 10. By the way, this is the, the content part. It says a response that is mostly with concision, and it is expressed clearly and fluently. And if we take a look at the IGCSE mark scheme as well, the mark scheme says that there is a response that demonstrates a thorough understanding of the requirements of the task. A thorough understanding of the requirements of the task. And if you take a look here, it also says mostly with concision. Now I want you to take a moment here and just take a look at the words that I've underlined. The words are concision, the words are clear, the words are fluent, and a thorough understanding. Because I can't write all of this down, it's too long, I'm going to put this here. So there are 4 things that I've underlined. Do you know what the word concision means? Concision comes from the word concise. Concise means to the point. To the point means basically this. The requirement of the task has been, sort of identified and has been solved. In other words, if I'm writing above the word limit, I am not adhering to the requirements of the task, because the requirements of the task were either 120 words for IG or 150 words. So if I am not adhering to the requirements of the task, it means I'm not in level 5 anymore. And if I'm going above the word limit, for example, am I being concise now? Concise means to the point. Am I being to the point? No. Chances are that I'm either being repetitive, or I'm prolonging sentences for absolutely no reason, or I'm avoiding, being relevant, and I'm actually adding extra details. So am I concise anymore? No. So I'm not in level 3 or level 5 again, which means that the max marks that I'm now going to end up with are either 7 or 8, or 7 or 8, or 3 and 2. So I hope you understand that this is how, and I know that you may know about level marking from other subjects as well, but this is how level marking works. There are indicators, level indicators, and then what you do is that if you are not falling into those level indicators, then you start falling down, and that is how you get marked for these questions. So if you have any other question regarding this, please ask me. I hope, and I've tried to answer as many questions as possible. If there's anything else that needs understanding or help regarding summary writing question, please don't forget to type it in the comments, and I will try my best to answer. I hope that this raw has been answered, the reading part, annotating part, and writing part. And that's about it. Thank you for coming in. Thank you for joining. I'll see you guys with another video as soon as I'm able to make it. Thank you. Allah Hafiz.